This is Join Us in France, episode 352. 352. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we talk about France, great places to visit in France, French culture, history, gastronomy, and news related to travel during this awful pandemic that won't stop. Today, I bring you a conversation with Elyse about the magnificent Chateau of Chantilly, not far from Paris, just a little north of Paris. If you're in Paris, you can go to Chantilly as a day trip, and we'll explain how you can do that by train. This place has a lot of history, an amazing art collection, beautiful stables and horses. It's a fun place, and it's one that many of you probably don't know that much about yet. After the interview, I'll play a conversation I had with Louise Rudnick, who is in Paris right now, and she shares her experience with getting the QR code. It's not gone swimmingly, but it's not turning out to be a big hindrance for her trip so far. If you like what we do here at Join Us in France, consider supporting us by visiting joinusinfrance.com/boutique to check out my cookbook, Join Us at the Table, my Paris tours on the Voice Map app, and my very popular itinerary review service where I'll help you craft the best vacation in France specifically for you. And if you follow Addicted to France on Instagram, you'll see my photos of Chantilly. I will post them this week. And of course, the best way to stay in touch with me and with the podcast is to sign up for the newsletter at joinusinfrance.com/newsletter. And the new and improved newsletter is coming back in September. Bonjour, Elyse.
Bonjour, Annie.
Hey, I'm going to give you a hint of what we're going to talk about.
Oh, my God. Here she goes again. She's hoofing her cappuccino. We were just in Paris, and we went to Chantilly, or Chantilly.
Chantilly. Beautiful, beautiful little town.
Beautiful town and a gorgeous, gorgeous park and chateau and museum.
Yeah, it was an interesting place. Now, I'd heard about it, but I had never been before.
Neither had I.
Right. So this time, since we were spending some time in Paris with Patricia, we decided, hey, this is our chance. Let's go. It was a full day affair.
It was a full day affair.
Right. So you take a train. Well, depending on where you are in Paris, you need to get to Gare du Nord.
Gare du Nord.
So that will probably involve a metro. Then you do a short train ride.
Very short.
Right. I mean, it's maybe 20 minutes.
Yeah, I think it was 22 minutes, something like that.
But because it's a train that goes all the way to Amiens, and it changes regions. It changes regions. So you have to buy that ticket from the Grande Ligne.
Right.
And not the regional lines.
Yeah.
Okay. It's kind of a detail, but we were looking for a ticket for that and couldn't find it because we were not looking on the right machines.
We were not looking on the right machines because we thought it was closer. And it's true that once you turn regions, which I didn't know until we did this, actually,
right,
it becomes part of the big train network.
Right. Things change. Anyway, so we went to Chantilly. It took maybe the trip an hour total, maybe an hour and 15 minutes.
An hour or so. I mean, we got stuck on a little city bus afterwards. It was kind of
right.
weird. But
So let's get this out of the way. So once you arrive in Chantilly, there's a city bus that says right on there, that it goes to the chateau. So I thought, and we also knew that there was a tourist bus that came.
Shuttle.
A shuttle, right? That came once an hour. But the shuttle wasn't there, and we weren't sure when it was going to come. The city bus was right there. It's free. So I thought, let's just get on the city bus. Well, that was not a great decision because the city bus takes different loops, and we had to go through an entire loop before eventually it took us to the chateau. So that took...
It was a bit of an escapade.
Right. So we got to see Chantilly, the town as well, which, it's not that exciting. But the chateau is totally worth it.
It's totally worth it.
By the way, on the way back, we just walked from the chateau to the train station.
She tried to kill me.
Well, that was like a mile, but
no, it was actually close to 2 miles. But it's you can do it if it's a very hot day. It's a little bit hard,
right?
But you can actually do it.
Yeah. So there you go. So. But this beautiful chateau was very interesting and has a lot to it, including horses,
why she's galloping in her cappuccino. We got a little bit nuts after a few days at Paris. They let us out of a box. We went to Paris. It was kind of like being literally let out of a cage. Celebrating freedom again. And we did Chantilly our last full day there. So it was really wonderful. So yes, and I think many people do associate Chantilly with horses. And it's very interesting to know that is, of course, part of the history of the chateau and of the grounds. But to my surprise, because I spent the last 2 days, because I tried to get this coherently in my brain so that I don't have to just keep looking at all my notes, I assumed that the horsey part of Chantilly went back to the beginning, but it doesn't. In fact, it doesn't. It actually started just before the time of the Revolution, when one of the princes who was the owner of the Chantilly, he was the one in just about 1790 who decided to create an enormous stable. So that is, of course, part of what there is there today. But to my surprise, it's a relatively recent part of the history
and by
of
recent,
Chantilly.
you mean 200 years?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's ever since that's what's happened since I've been here. It has to be a lot longer than that before I don't consider it recent anymore.
Yeah.
But anyway, the history of Chantilly, I had heard about it a lot. I had heard about it because I knew that there was a museum there that had some artworks that were extremely important to see, which is a fact. And
actually, when we got in and I got to see the pieces in the museum, I recognized many of these pieces as illustrations I had seen in school books. And history books. So these are the prototypical pieces of certain artists, or the painting of a certain king or queen that everybody has seen in the books.
Right.
So we recognized a lot of them.
I
did anyway, because having gone to school in France, that's
exactly
what you grow up with.
That's what you grow up with. Yeah. So the Chantilly, in my mind, I don't know what I expected. I expected an enormous chateau. The park is huge. I'm going to start with these statistics from the back end because it's kind of impressive. The immediate park, that is the area right around the chateau that we kind of visited because we actually took a little choo-choo train at the end, is 115 hectares, which I calculated out as about 250 acres. That's the part with the French gardens, that are very geometric and all of that.
Yeah, Le Nôtre
Gardens. And then there's another part, and it has a canal, and we'll talk a couple of minutes about Le Nôtre. And then there's another little part that has animals and things like that. But there's a forest that belongs to the domain of Chantilly, and it is 6,300 hectares.
Okay, so it's big.
It's big. And this is a half of what the original domain was.
Right.
Only a half. So
I heard something really interesting on French radio recently, that France used to be covered with woods.
Yes.
In the Middle Ages and going forward. And then in the last 200 years, they cut down a lot of the woods. But since the 50s, we're going back up as far as the number of woods that are in France.
It's true.
So now 10% of the surface of France is wooded areas.
Yes.
Like as in not 5 trees, but large wooded areas.
Large wooded areas.
Yeah. So we're going back up in the right direction, I guess.
And of course that is one of the reasons, besides the rivers, that makes France such a rich country in terms of the land. It really is. So let's go back to the beginning. Chantilly is what? It's north of Paris. We figured out it was about 55 kilometers, which is about 30 something miles north of Paris. It's at the beginning of what you could call a little bit of rolling hills, not very high, just kind of little vallonné, very small rolling hills, nice wood,
it's pretty flat.
kind of green area, not totally flat. The original chateau goes back 1,000 years. There was a chateau there, and the only remnants of that you can see is the vestiges of a moat. There's a little bit of a vestige of a moat. That was actually part of the reconstruction, because all of the main structure was in fact rebuilt in the end of the 19th century, which makes it extremely recent, even though it does not look like it is recent at all.
Right. It looks old.
It looks old.
It all looks old.
It all looks old, right? And the inside looks even older than the outside. But
we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. So it was, in fact, a feudal fortified castle. And it belonged to the Lord of Senlis, which is a town not far away, which also has a chateau that one of these days I would like to visit. I've never been up there either. And
I think that might be said Senlis.
Do they pronounce the S?
I think so.
Well, I never know. Okay.
Yeah, Senlis, yes.
You never know with the S at the end, so there you go. Senlis. Fine. Whatever. They can do whatever they want with it. Okay. And then for various reasons that are actually interesting, but I'm not going to go into all of the details, the chateau changed hands, and it changed hands 2 times in a couple of centuries. And then in the year 1484, the chateau was given as a legacy to someone whose family is extremely important in the history of France. Really, 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 really important. And that is the Montmorency family. And so in 1484, because the Lord who was in the process of dying had no surviving sons, he gave the Chateau of Chantilly and its domain to his nephew.
Okay.
And this nephew was Guillaume de Montmorency.
Okay.
And he was part of a lineage that it's very complicated, and I have to admit that it's still hard for me to follow, but this is royalty. This is not just nobility. This means these were people who could trace their ancestry back to Charlemagne and were part of the royal family. And through all of the centuries, up until the end of the 19th century, this chateau has been a royal chateau. It has belonged to someone who is part of what they call the royal blood, which means it had to be a prince or a duke who was either a brother of or cousin of a king. Okay, so it's really that kind of thing. And the Montmorency family were famous for centuries as being great warriors and for being very, very rich. Mm-hmm. And they made their riches in several different ways. One was by becoming a maréchal, which is the chief general of the king's army. Okay. The other was by buying more land, because they were apparently a family that was very astute at adding land to their property. Mm-hmm. And the other was somewhere along the way in the time between the 15th century and the time of the Revolution, they developed a skill at basically doing buying and trading, which in a sense would be the equivalent of speculating on things. So in the end, the Montmorency family was richer than the kings.
Whoa.
And these were all, I think we could mostly first cousins and second cousins. I mean, they were that close to the family because the if you trace the lineage down, like it started with being the brother of the king and then just keeps going straight down that way. So the Montmorency family was very important. And the statue we saw was, remember when we were talking about whether Anne was a man or a woman. So there's a huge statue of a man on a horse, and his name was Anne.
Anne de Montmorency.
And he was the connétable. And the connétable was the chief military officer who was basically second in command after the king.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal, right? And so that statue that is there now is because he was one of the most prestigious ancestors, and he took the ancient medieval castle and renovated it and made it into a gorgeous Renaissance castle. A Renaissance chateau. That's the difference. It was not fortified. It was with the beautiful open windows and all of that.
Yeah.
And he is the one that also built, there's a pavilion that actually looks just like a house, but is considered to be the little chateau. The one that was next to it, there's a kind of parallel building. Remember, we were wondering what it was. Mm-hmm. That was a kind of secondary guest house, which made us all laugh because when you see the size of it, you think they had to have room for their guests,
It was very large, but it wasn't as well kept.
No.
On the outside anyway. And you don't visit it.
You don't visit it, no.
Right.
And it would be interesting to know who actually occupies it, if anybody does these days. It's probably the staff that takes care of the museum and the grounds. Mm-hmm. So this Anne de Montmorency, he built 7 chapels. There are only 2 that are left. He built 2 small pavilions that are off somewhere in the park that you can visit if you can wander. There are golf carts that you can rent. You can take a train. You can walk. I didn't see bicycles, but maybe they will eventually have some of them. But the other problem...
That would be excellent, because I think that's a great way to visit
especially this
park.
place. It really is.
I will look to see if I can find a bike rental place in the
village.
city of Chantilly.
Yeah.
It's bigger than a village.
It's a town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I will go and see if they do bike rentals, because that would be an excellent way to visit this place.
Absolutely. It really would. It's got all these paths and into the woods with statues and secret things you don't even necessarily see. And by foot, you wouldn't do all of it.
No, and the little train does take you to some of it, but not all of it.
And you can't get off.
And it would be really pleasant, I think, even on a hot day, which is, it was a hot day when we were there. Because once you're in the woods, it's shaded.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It would be
beautiful.
really fun to do on a bike, I think.
Yeah, and it's lots of little things hidden away in different places.
Yeah, I just need to find a bike rental thing to recommend on the website.
Now, there was one problem with the Montmorency family.
Ah, just one?
Well, a major one. They had a tendency to rebel against the king.
But we...
And so...
Well, they were richer than the king.
They were richer than the king, and they were also... not too many of them were pretended to be the rightful king, but they had minds of their own. And so there was this strange, almost tradition in the family every 100 years that one of them, because they were dukes, would take the side of the king's brother in a rebellion against the king.
I see. Okay.
That's not a very good idea.
Right.
It's really not a very good idea to do that, and
kept them busy.
And and it happens also that in the 16th century, strangely enough, a part of the family became Protestant.
Oh.
And that was a no-no for royalty. I mean, so they were actually allied with Henry IV, who was, of course, the Protestant king that converted to Catholicism to keep his throne. And they were cousins of Henry IV as well. And so something happened in 1632. And it's interesting because it's connected also to the history of Toulouse. And I've talked about it many times, but now that I've been there, it really makes even more sense to me. In 1632, the man who was ultimately the last Duke of Montmorency, he was in his 30s, and he took the side of Louis XIII's brother in a rebellion against the king. Now, Louis XIII, just try and follow for a second. We have Henry IV, who was the Protestant king who was trying to be tolerant, who signed papers like the Edict of Nantes saying everybody could have religious freedom and things like that. And his oldest son was Louis XIII, and Henry IV was assassinated by a fanatic, a Catholic fanatic. But his son, Louis XIII, was brought up as a fanatical Catholic. And he really tightened the reins on the kingdom.
I see.
And so the Duc de Montmorency, who happened to have been the godson of Henry IV, he did this very stupid thing. He participated in a rebellion, and his army that he formed with the King Louis XIII's brother fought in a battle against Louis XIII, and he lost. And Louis XIII did something that nobody had done in a long time. And I mean in a long time. Because you never, ever, ever killed a member of the royal family.
Right.
You could send them into exile.
Right.
Take their lands away.
Yeah, you could capture their children and hold them for 10 years.
You could ransom them off, but you never killed them. And Louis XIII decided that he was going to execute the Duke of Montmorency. And by that, end all rebellion against him. And the Duke of Montmorency was executed here in Toulouse.
Right.
In 1632. And the king and his entourage came to witness it. It was... Do you know that all of the kings... I was reading about this yesterday. Every other king of every kingdom in Western Europe petitioned Louis XIII to not do this.
Right.
Because it set a precedent.
It's a big no-no, yeah. And
it's a big no-no.
Right. But why did they do it in Toulouse, though?
Because the Southwest, particularly this area around Toulouse, was the seat of much rebellion. And it was always in the Southwest that these plots were fomented against the king. And he had in mind the fact that there had been various other rebellions in the past in the Southwest, much more than any other major region of France.
I see.
So even though the Duke of Montmorency was absolutely not from around here.
Right. Toulouse is a long way from Chantilly.
It's a long way from Chantilly. It really is.
Yeah.
I don't even know, to be honest, where the battle actually took place. It could have been that it was in the southwest of France, but because he wanted to make a statement, he did it in Toulouse.
Right, and on the public square.
On a public square.
Right, in the center of the city.
In the center of the city.
Today you can walk.
You can see the plaque.
You can see the plaque where it happened.
That's
and
right.
It's hard to miss.
Yep.
And you have a statue of the Duke of Montmorency, above where it happened.
Exactly.
It's like his ghost.
Yeah, like a ghost, So, this was a really big no. And it was a bet. It was kind of one of those things where Louis XIII was betting that instead of having trouble land on him, that it was going to calm things down. Well, guess what? He was right. Because after that, and up to the time of the revolution, there was no more rebellion. There was no more, kings. Who is the king? Okay, so this is where we get back to Chantilly. When the Duke of Montmorency gets executed, he was married. They married young anyway. His land and everything was confiscated. Okay, the chateaus were confiscated, the lands, they had lots and lots of lands and confiscated. But interestingly enough, Louis XIII, when he died, his wife gave everything back to the Duke's widow.
Oh.
Except Chantilly.
Ah, okay.
She kept Chantilly. I don't know why I don't know if she kept it because she liked it or it was just like a token because that was where he lived. Actually, it was kind of like, well, no, you're not going to get this one back. But what was here, this is strange, is that the Duke of Montmorency had a daughter. She was probably very young when he died. She was married off to one of the king's cousins. This is the family of the Orléans. This is still, to this day, the last of the royals who are alive in France. This is the family of the Orléans Condé family.
Right.
And so what happened was, when this daughter of the Duke of Montmorency married this guy, Anne of Austria, who was Louis XIII's wife, she said to this young woman and her husband, who were basically part of her family, you can have Chantilly.
I see, okay.
So that is why, starting in the middle of the 1600s, Chantilly became a royal chateau in the Orléans Condé family and stayed that way until the 20th century.
Okay.
And
yeah, because you see a lot of de Condé in there.
You see a lot of the Condé there. And you
Right.
then you see the Duc de Orléans Condé, the Machin of Orléans Condé, because of this rebellion where he got himself executed. Otherwise, it would still be a Montmorency.
Okay.
It would still be in the hands of the Montmorency.
Interesting.
So what happened then was that you have the family, that basically the brothers' lineage. So this is basically what the Orléans family in France is basically the descendants of Louis XVII's brother, going straight down. And they're the ones still, if you look them up, the ones who pretend to be the Herod. Like, I'm going to take the throne. I'm going to be the next king. They're the Orleans family.
Well,
if you ever meet one, you'll know who they are.
They don't really want to take the throne. They just like us to know that they're
they
hot
are.
stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, that they have that name.
And of course, there's always people who will worship royals or whatever.
Yes, yes. There are.
Yeah.
So we get to the Orleans Condé, and that is, of course, at the end of the 1600s. And we have a man that is nicknamed Le Grand Condé.
Yeah, Le Grand Condé.
Le Grand Condé. And he's Louis II, blah, 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 blah. His name goes on forever, you know. He is the one that renovates the chateau. And he is the one, in spite of what you and I thought, he hires Le Nôtre, and Le Nôtre does the grounds and the garden there before he does Versailles, not after.
Okay.
So Versailles, basically what happens is that Le Nôtre, who is this great designer of gardens and architect, he does these beautiful French gardens. He does this canal called the Grand Canal. He does all of this stuff that you see later on in even greater scale in Versailles. But he starts actually at Chantilly.
I see. Well, okay. I gotta say, I have seen a lot of these Le Nôtre gardens, and they all look the same. So the guy had a knack for gardens, but he pretty much made the same garden everywhere he went.
Well, it's what they call the French garden, which means it has to have a geometric form.
Right,
it has
it's geometric,
to be,
nice long ponds.
Right, so it has to be symmetrical. It has to have a long alley of water, or some kind of canal of some kind.
And usually there's cross.
Right.
There's water that it's like the pond, the artificial ponds are in the shape of a cross.
Exactly, but and they put little boats out on them, and everything. But this was basically
a lot of grass,
and a lot of statuary.
Yes, statuary.
This is a French garden in the 1600s and 1700s.
Right.
Basically.
So at Versailles, they added a lot of bushes, very tall, well groomed bushes that kind of break the boringness of grass.
And they added fountains, which you don't have at Chantilly. Really, you don't have Versailles.
Right, Chantilly doesn't have any.
I didn't see any fountains.
I did not either. But of course, so when we went, they were filming something. We don't know what they were filming. But they had a lot of film stuff.
Yes,
and there I was with my tiny, €250 little camera trying to capture images, and I was like, they have millions of equipment here on site.
We didn't see any actors that I know.
No
I
actors.
was very disappointed.
No actors, but we did see a lot of
technicians,
people setting up and what have you, and they had probably hundreds. I mean, by the hundreds.
I'm sure
huge.
that they did.
Yeah.
So anyway, probably a movie.
And I was a bit annoyed because I couldn't get a nice big picture without one of these vans or cranes.
She gets annoyed by things like that.
Yeah, I'm like, put them away, please. Like, you're not using them right now. Put it away.
So here we have Le Grand Condé, who has made this enormous park, who has hired Le Nôtre. And here we have another story of a hero who's had problems. He was a great hero of battles. And then something happened. And probably...
But why is he called Le Grand?
Because...
Was he tall?
No, it's because he was the greatest hero of certain battles.
I see.
He was considered to be a military genius, but then there's something must be in the air or the water of Chantilly. He also took part in a rebellion against the king, and this is no longer a Montmorency. I mean, so it must be in the air and the water of Chantilly. And so what happened was he decided, or he was decided by the king. I have no idea. I don't really know. That he was no longer going to be a general in the army. He was no longer going to be a major military man.
Demoted.
He retired to Chantilly and devoted the rest of his life to Chantilly. So he expanded it. He hired Le Nôtre. He also brought in Molière and music, and he created a cultural environment in Chantilly, so much so that all of the royal family and all of the nobles came to Chantilly because it was the place to be.
Uh-huh.
And so
And it wasn't very far from Paris.
And it wasn't very far from Paris.
Right.
In 1671, he decided it was time to reconcile with his cuz. His cuz was Louis XIV. Louis XIV was the one that basically had banished him to his land, saying, I'm not going to hurt you, but I don't want to see you anymore. You've done something I really don't approve of.
Uh-huh.
And this is the story of Vatel. So,
who?
In April of 1671, Le Grand Louis d'Orléans Condé invites his cousin, Louis XIV, and about 600 people to spend 3 days of banqueting and festivities in Chantilly.
Okay. I can imagine that it would lend itself to that sort of thing very well. Yes,
exactly.
Yes.
And the chief person, and I love the title, because today we would just say the chef, but actually the title in French is Contrôleur Général de la Bouche.
Aha.
The Contrôleur Général de la Bouche is a man named Vatel.
Vatel?
Yes.
So W-A-T...
V-A-T-E-L.
V-A-T-E-L.
Yes.
Vatel. Okay.
Who is...
I've never heard of this man.
Yeah, he's the one we talked about, or maybe it was with Patricio. Anyway, so this man had come up from the ranks. He had started out as a commis in the kitchen, like washing dishes. He didn't come from a grand family or anything.
Yeah.
He was originally from Switzerland, but he had worked for Fouquet. He had worked, then he was hired to work at Chantilly.
Uh-huh.
He was basically the head chef and also in charge of everything related to food and the kitchen. And he was responsible for making sure that this banquet that was so important for the reconciliation of Le Grand Condé and the Louis XIV went well.
Yeah.
He was 40 years old.
Uh-huh.
He apparently was a perfectionist and very, 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 very nervous about this particular event. Although people say now that there had to have been another reason involved. Anyway, the story is that the first day went very well. The second day, he put in an order for fish for the third day, which was a Friday, because, of course, on Friday, people ate fish. They didn't eat meat.
Right.
And because Chantilly is not very close to anything but some rivers, he put in orders for fish to come from the big markets in Paris and from Normandy. And apparently, because I did a whole lot of reading about this yesterday, there's something about how this didn't make any sense. So I don't know, maybe he was having a breakdown or something. But anyway, what happened was he woke up at 4:00 in the morning on that Friday, and the fish had not been delivered. And it takes hours, you could imagine, especially for preparing for 600 people and the king, and it's the king and the queen and all of these people.
It's stressful.
And by 3 hours later, he was sure that the fish was not going to come, and he had no idea what he was going to do to serve the king, and he went into the kitchen and committed suicide.
Okay, that's not...
In a horrible way. In a horrible way, really. And the story is...
Like everybody saw it?
Well, they called Le Grand Condé in because they didn't know what to do, because... The chief chef just killed himself in the kitchen. Oh my God. And the worst thing is that an hour later, the fish arrived.
Oh, dear. Oh.
So what happened was that somebody told Louis XIV about this, and he was very upset. And he was really upset. And he said, basically, I'm so sorry. I mean, he shouldn't have thought that it was going to be a matter of his life or death. To just,
right.
He said, you could have fed half of my entourage and given the rest of them something else. I wouldn't have even cared or whatever what happened.
Yeah.
So this marked Le Grand Condé. I mean, he was devastated by this. Absolutely devastated.
You don't want your caterer to commit suicide in the middle of your wedding. This is not good.
And this is I mean, the good news, unfortunately for Vatel, it was not good news, was that Le Grand Condé and Louis XIV were buddies after that. They became best buddies. They reconciled completely.
That's good.
And what happened was that everything was fine until the revolution. And this is what happened at the revolution. And this is interesting because I don't think this happened to any other major chateau. I mean, I know that there were certain things that happened at Versailles. At the time of the revolution, the Orléans Condé, who was there, the prince who was there, he was actually a prince, not a duke, the day after the taking of the Bastille, he got out of there. He left and
Chantilly?
He left Chantilly and he went to England.
I see.
And like 1,400 other members of the royalty and the nobility,
That was probably wise.
it was a good idea.
Yeah.
So in 1789, he fled to England, and he did not come back until 1814.
So how long is that?
That's 25 years.
25 years. Oh, yeah, that's a long time.
And what happened to the Chateau of Chantilly is that the chateau was literally taken apart, stone by stone. The entire chateau. What we saw was a reproduction of half the size of the original chateau.
Oh.
Okay? The side building that we saw, that guest house that kind of looks funky,
Yeah.
is the original building. And the only reason that was saved and the beautiful stables were saved is because the people who were taking apart the chateau hadn't received a paper that they were supposed to get from the Revolutionary Committee saying blah, 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 I don't know what. And so they eventually just left, but they literally took apart the entire chateau stone by stone. And they took the lands and divided it up into tiny little parcels and sold them off to anybody who wanted anywhere, So they dismembered basically the entire estate and the chateau of Chantilly.
Wow.
And when the Prince Condé came back in 1814, he was already an old man. He had become a widower, and his two sons had been executed fighting against the revolutionaries. So what happened was he decided to try and restore the building, but it was very, very difficult for him, even though he still had money. I mean, he had a lot of money. They did not have a lot of money.
Yeah.
But because he no longer had anybody to follow in his footsteps, he, at the age of 78, he gave Chantilly to his nephew. It's actually his great-nephew, who is the last duke to live there, the one who created the museum that exists there, the one who we saw the portrait of, who died in 1897.
Yeah.
And he was the Duc d'Aumale, who was the last
How do you
prince.
spell that?
Aumale.
Okay. Dommel.
He was the last of the Orléans Condé.
Okay.
And he was actually one of the sons of Louis Philippe, the king of the French.
Right. But somebody is living there today.
Only the people who work there. So I have to read you this. It's a translation from the site, but it actually made me feel emotional. The Duc d'Aumale was someone who had been brought up most of his life in exile. So when he came back, and it was his great uncle who gave him Chantilly, he knew that it was something that had been in their family for centuries and centuries, and it meant a lot to him. He was a widower too. He also had lost his children, and he is the one responsible for rebuilding it and making the building we saw, that we visited ourselves, okay, which is about half the size of the original chateau. But he was an intellectual. He was the one who collected books. He was the one that collected art. He was the one that decided that Chantilly, having seen centuries of blood, centuries of going from one family to another, should no longer be something that was fought over. And so he made the decision to give Chantilly, the domain and the museum and everything about it, to the Institut de France, l'Institut de France.
Ah, okay. And there are signs about that too. Okay.
And they are the owners of Chantilly. And this is what he said. He wrote very long testaments. And part of it he said, I no longer want this to be a home. I want this to be a museum, a place of work and research for all those who are interested in my collections, my library, my artwork, my archives, my books. I want this to be open and free to everyone and anyone who is interested in all of them. And the only people who will live here from now on are the people who work here. And so the people that we imagine living there are, in fact, the people who are responsible, the curators and all the people who work it. And, of course, what happened was that this famous Duc d'Aumale, he is the one that brought in all those magnificent books in the library that we saw.
Right. The library, I mean, they're not the type of books that you would pick up and read because they are all beautiful old books.
Old books.
Yeah.
All of the illuminated manuscripts. He's the one. He apparently acquired thousands of books. He was interested in the history of books, the illuminated manuscripts. There's a very famous book called the Book of Hours of the Duke of Berry. Mm-hmm. You weren't standing next to me. Patricia was. I got so excited. I was jumping up and down. I have seen pictures of this book in art history books all my life. And there it was.
Yeah.
There it was. It's filled with work like that. It's filled with gorgeous paintings.
Yeah, there was a lot of beautiful
three
stuff
Raphaels are at this museum, which is the Musée Condé. And there are
they're
only
in a
other
separate
three.
little room.
And separate little room.
Yeah,
right.
which it says you can only spend 2 minutes in the room when there's a line, but there wasn't a line.
There wasn't a
so
line.
we could
No, we
look
were
at
lucky,
them at,
But they have all of the great painters, all of the great French painters, all of the great Dutch painters, some of the great Italian painters, 3 Raphaels. There's only other one museum that has 3, and that's the Louvre. Mm-hmm. It has magnificent stained glass windows, and then it has, of course, lots of portraits of royalty and nobility. And some of those rooms, you and I agree, are kind of musty and fusty.
Right. So they really need to redo the lighting. They need a young. This is my personal opinion. They need a young, hip museum professional who can just turn this into a good museum for today, because it is a bit of a musty old French museum vibe to it. Not as bad as Malmaison.
No, not as bad as Malmaison.
Which we'll talk about on a different occasion. But it's, they really need, we have so much art in France. We need to, il faut le mettre en valeur. Il faut que les gens aient envie d'y aller.
You have to. The problem with this, and it is part. It's the other part that they quote that I didn't bring, but it does apparently specifically say in his will that he does not want anything to be changed, which is kind of weird, I mean, but I thought it was interesting is that he said he specifically wanted to leave it to the Institut de France because it was a neutral institution.
Right.
No more politics, no more fighting, no more, this or that.
So l'Institut de France is this gorgeous building with a dome where on the Pont des Arts.
Yeah.
That is the closest dome to you. It's a beautiful building, and it's where the French Academy meets and several other academies of learned,
all
everything.
the learned societies,
right, all the learned societies and stuff. So it's a beautiful thing. But the museum at Chantilly has so much. I think they need to make some changes. I'm sorry, Mr. whatever.
We could not see the paintings that were all the way up on top, and of course some of them are in those narrow spaces, so the lighting is not very good in some of them.
The lighting is terrible.
But of course the pieces that were the most important you could easily see.
Right. So the lighting is not terrible everywhere, but there are some rooms
just a few tiny
that
rooms.
really need to be redone. And they have one thing that I hadn't seen anywhere else. They have this whole collection of stained glass windows about the Greek mythology.
Right. They were gorgeous.
They were not about Christian stories. They were Greek mythology. They were very interesting to look at. And because of COVID, they have this restriction that you can't sit anywhere. So all of the benches were like no sitting.
Right.
And when you've been kind of standing
forever,
the kind of walk you do in a museum when you're just barely moving,
shuffling around
like that, it's really tiring after a while. And so the experience wasn't ideal, I would say, but this has some to do with COVID. I think this will go away.
And it wasn't that we were lucky we went at the beginning. It wasn't that crowded.
Right. The crowds were not, it was fine. But there were a lot of people there.
But there were a fair number of people.
It's a popular thing. And it was a Saturday, so on the grounds there were 3 or 4 weddings going on. People coming for, with their whole party, their whole group. To take photos and to, play music and do whatever it is that people do. It was fun to see. The horses were fun.
The horses were fun. How many did you think we saw? 12?
Yeah, about that. And of course, we only saw half of the stables.
Yeah.
Okay, and at one point they had a group of people riding along, and the horses all look very, calm and collected and whatever. There was also a young lady, because they train the horses to do. They do shows.
They do shows.
Okay, which I'm not into horse shows, so I can't really comment on that. But the horse to me looked very calm and knew exactly what to do.
Right.
Like, this is a horse who knows his stuff.
Right.
And gets ridden all the time. And,
Now, the stables, I just to mention that, this is interesting to know. We only saw a small part of it. It says here, now the stables, it's in French, it's les grandes écuries. They're separate from the chateau. They're kind of off on another hill. It's really quite impressive. I thought it was really a beautiful building from the outside.
It is.
And that is the original building from the 1700s.
And it doesn't look like stables from the outside. It looks like a chateau from the outside.
It's 186 meters long. That's huge.
Yeah, it's very long.
And it apparently, at the time that it was built, it held 250 horses. I have a hard time imagining that. That's an awful lot of horses. And 500, there were on the land, on the domain, there were 500 hunting dogs.
Yeah.
Because the prince at the time, that was his thing. That was really his thing, to go hunting and riding horses.
Yeah.
But the shows have only been since 1982. Mm-hmm. So that was when they started doing these beautiful horse shows that they do still on a regular basis. And they created that little horse museum, which I took some very nice pictures. It was really kind of neat. I mean,
yeah, it was good. It was interesting.
It was interesting.
I would definitely recommend this place for people who are interested in horses, and those of you who have kids who are interested in horses, especially if you're into competition and things like that. They do shows in the evenings. We didn't buy a ticket to the shows, but you could stay for the shows in the evening. It's really interesting for... They also have this weird little funky area with kangaroos, but it's not kangaroos, they're wallabies.
They're wallabies.
And a few big birds, des pons.
Peacocks.
Peacocks, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I got myself zapped.
She got zapped. She zapped trying to take a picture.
I hate... This is just me again, but I really don't like zoos. And I have not bought a ticket to a zoo in a long time because I don't like what they do in zoos. And I know some zoos are very good and preserve blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But they had all these animals in an enclosure with an electric fence. And I happened to touch it because... I'm an idiot.
Because she was trying to take a picture.
I was trying to take a picture and I hadn't seen the signs. There are a few signs that say it's electrified. I had never been zapped so hard in my life, okay? It was hard. This was not... Because sometimes, like around a horse or a cow pasture, you have these wires that are like it's a gentle little...
exactly.
Whatever. No. This was not
nasty.
it. This was a nasty electrical current going through there. So I don't like that they do that. I wish they would cut it out. But what are they going to do with the animals?
But I'm almost certain. That's what I said. I would bet you anything. It's not to keep the animals in. It's to keep people from stealing them.
I don't know what it is.
Because they were not in small pens. They had large fields to be in.
Yeah, they had a field. Yeah.
And it wasn't. I mean, I'm pretty sure that would be the reason. But that's just a part of the park. I mean,
right. That's a small part of it.
So what you have is this chateau that's called the Musée Condé, which is where you have all of the art and the books and the objects and porcelain and portraits of every royal person that's ever been, I suppose, or something like that. I mean, you really get it's really incredible. Lots and lots of painting, lots of other things, and it's really an interesting chateau. And we came out when you do the circuit, you realize there is a part that you don't visit, so it'd be interesting to see that part too, but obviously you're not supposed to go there.
Yeah.
The chapel was closed, unfortunately. I saw a picture of it. It looks kind of neat on the inside. Mm-hmm. You have the huge horse stables that are on the other side, so it's a little, just a 5-10 minute walk to the other side where they are with the horses and the grounds, and then you have the guest house, and then you have the park. And that's why we were there for a good part of the day.
Yeah. So I would say that Chantilly is a great visit for people who've been to Paris a lot.
Yep.
And just, have seen everything, which is a lot of our listeners.
Yeah.
And also people who have kids who are interested in horses. But
Yes.
if you're into competition, that sort of thing, then yes, it would be really good.
I think if you're interested in art, the museum is fabulous.
Yeah, the museum is.
It's
really
also the
impressive.
park is free. I mean, you don't have to. The part of the park, not the whole park. The part where the stables are, that side, you can just hang out on the grass there and take a look because there's water around the castle. It's actually very pretty, and you can take a pedalo. You can actually go boating on the water right around there.
Yeah, but I think if you have a bicycle, it would be great. Also, it would be a great place to bring a picnic.
Yes,
because the restaurant situation. But of course, we're right out of COVID, so not everything is open.
Right.
There are restrictions, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
So it would be, I think, a good place to bring a picnic. And there were lots of people doing just
lots
that.
and lots of people doing that.
On the
Exactly.
grass, enjoying
Exactly.
a picnic. I didn't notice public bathrooms outside of the chateau.
That was a bit of an issue.
Yeah.
That was a bit.
So,
of course, there's the town. You can go into town, but
right.
then,
But they do have a bathroom in the horse museum.
the
That's the one
horse
we
museum.
used.
That's right. That's right.
So, but I'm sure in the chateau they have them too. But
they must have had
but
one.
if you just bring your picnic, where do you go to the bathroom?
Right. Maybe out
know.
somewhere in the park. We didn't really know.
Yeah, we didn't. We didn't.
But I mean, if you've already done, it's not as crowded. It's not as opulent as Versailles.
No.
It's a very different feel. It's the museum is really an art and object museum. The grounds are beautiful, but they're not as well taken care of or beautiful as Versailles.
Right.
But it's nice, and I liked it. It was just kind of a little bit more low key than Versailles,
Oh, definitely, and definitely not as mobbed.
and not as mobbed.
We didn't see a single bus. Well, of course, there wouldn't be a bus of tourists
No.
yet, but they might have them the rest
They
of the
might
year.
have some, but it wouldn't. It's
nothing
not.
like
It's not
Versailles.
It's not as
Yeah.
crowded. It would
Yeah.
never be as crowded. So it's definitely to do after you've done some of the other things. But I'm glad we went. I'm really happy.
Yeah, me too. And I'm glad I learned about Montmorency, the one who's. I mean, I've seen his statue in Toulouse forever. I didn't know.
Now when I walk across the plaque, I'm going to think about his home and all that stuff too.
Yeah.
It's like really.
He had a pretty nice home. I don't know what he came here for.
hey, I mean, there's princes who want power. What can I tell you?
Yeah, who knows? Thank you so much, Elyse.
You are quite welcome, Annie.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Again, I want to thank my patrons for supporting the show and giving back. Patrons get several exclusive rewards. For doing so, you can see them all at patreon.com/join us. Thank you all for supporting the show. Some of you for many years now. You are wonderful. And a shout out this week to one new patron, Carabis2, who is the only person who joined Patreon this week. Some weeks are great on Patreon, some not so much. As a matter of fact, this whole week has not been all that great for me. I lost more patrons than I gained, and a lot of other things have gone not my way, but I'll explain in a minute. Another way to support this podcast is to hire me to be your itinerary consultant. That's going really well, and I can tell that a lot of you are itching to come back to France, but you're not sure what to do. You're not sure it's safe. I hear you. International travel has been turned on its head with this pandemic, and we're not quite done with it, are we? So I know for a fact that I can help you do it safely once you're in France. And if you want to check out this service, take a look at joinusinfrance.com/boutique. In France, the numbers are going in the right direction again. Both the number of positive cases and the number of new admissions to the hospital are heading down. This is even true in Guadeloupe and Martinique, where it was scary high. Even there, they are heading down. 83% of French people over 12 have had one dose of the vaccine. 74% of us are fully vaccinated. It's good, but it's not good enough. I hope we find a way to increase that number now that people are coming back from vacation and that a few mandates are coming to fruition. The other thing that worries people is, how do I get the Health Pass QR code? Here's what Louise Rednick told me about it. The audio quality isn't great, and I'll talk about that after we talk. Bonjour, Louise, and welcome to Join Us in France. Thank you so much for talking to me about your struggles getting the QR code for the French Health Pass.
Hello, Annie. Nice to meet you.
So you are in Paris right now. Tell us what you've tried so far to get that QR code, and has it been a problem that you don't have it? Let's start with that to begin with.
Okay, so to begin, it has actually not been a problem that we don't have it. We have been using our CDC cards and showing that wherever we've been. Our test was at Versailles the day before yesterday, 2 days ago, and that was really to see whether it would work there, and it worked just fine. Yeah.
So
and my son
you sound English, but you live in the U.S., which is why you have a CDC card.
That's correct, yes. We've been living there for more than 20 years, yep.
Okay. So what have you tried so far?
So before we left the U.S., we actually went to the French government site and completed the forms for converting our card into a French pass sanitaire. We provided the materials, tickets, copies of our tickets, a copy of our passport, copies of our CDC card, and the requisite form that they required we completed. So we did do that. We sent it off to the email address that started with Area 1, a long address, and ended in .gouv.fr. And we sent it off about 8 days prior to departure from the U.S. We initially had problems because the file size was way too large, and the email was kicked back, and then we tried to reduce the size of the attachments, and finally were able to send something from which we received a response, an auto-response, that it had been received, and they would respond with a QR code. So we waited and waited. A couple of days after my husband and I submitted our paperwork, my son, who was traveling with us, we did the same for him, and he actually received his QR code within 72 hours of submission.
Oh, wow.
So he was all good to go. Yeah, he was all good to go. And we were not, and we were waiting and waiting, and we figured we'd just get on the plane and get here and then figure out the rest from there. So we did that and arrived 5 days ago now. And on arrival in Paris, I had listened to your podcast, and had gone to the Hotel Dieu to try to get a pass sanitaire in person. They informed us that they were no longer doing so.
Yeah.
We went to a pharmacy that my husband happens to have the name of. They then directed us to another third location, which was a vaccination center here in the city.
Right.
So we did walk there as well, and to no avail. They just directed us to the website. So
right.
The website is king.
Right. But a bit fickle, obviously.
Yeah, and who knows why we haven't received a response. And maybe because our ticket, we have such a long stay here relative to my son. He's here for 2 weeks. We're here for 2 months. That might have something to do with it, but we just don't know. So the good news is we are using our provided CDC card, and that seems to work just fine.
Right.
We've had 0 problems in the restaurants and whatnot.
So you've been to museums, restaurants, cafes, you've done all the normal things, and everybody just takes your CDC cards.
Yep. They get ready to scan it at first and realize there's nothing to scan, and they say that's fine and move on, and everything is just fine.
Right. I think it's because, I mean, the restaurants and such, they just don't want to get fined. But so they have, like, well, look, these people they have a card, so be reasonable. I think that's why they don't want to give you grief over that, because,
Right.
it's obvious what's happening. It's not like complicated. Now, it might be a problem. Have you tried this anywhere else besides Paris?
We have not.
Okay.
No, not outside Paris.
Okay. Yeah, I would bet if there's going to be a question, it's going to be from somebody outside of Paris who's never seen an American CDC card and think, you're making things up or something. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, to travel here, you have to have the official, you have to have the green light essentially on the travel app.
Yeah.
The Verify, which is what we use, and that very similar process. The materials and collateral that you need for that is exactly the same as you provide for the cost and repair.
Right.
But one is one and one is the other, and they're not the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Louise. Have a wonderful trip. And ping me when you get it eventually.
Yeah, we will.
Oh, and another thing I should mention is, if it becomes a problem, anybody who's in this situation, you can get a PCR test, which will give you the coveted QR code, but it's only good for a few days. So,
okay, super. That's good to know.
yeah, but if you really run into a problem, that's the way to handle it, is to just do a PCR test and then, but you have to do it again. I think they're good for 5 days. So
5 days. Okay.
not ideal.
Super.
Merci,
All right.
Louise.
Merci, Annie. Au revoir.
Au revoir. In the same vein, I got an email from someone called Stephanie, and I told her I'd respond to her questions on the episode because she's not the only one wondering about those things. So here I go. Hi, Annie. I'm very excited and also anxious about my trip to Paris next week. My husband and I leave on the 2nd. We submitted and very carefully checked that we correctly submitted for our health pass on August 13th. We have waited every day and nothing has come. I was anxious when I heard on your podcast that another couple coming at the same time as us already had theirs and received it quite quickly. Another person I know who is going on a separate trip also got his quite quickly and submitted after I did. Have you heard of any of your listeners going to France and not hearing back on their submission for the health pass? The second question is the terrorism alert status is very high, and the U.S. State Department is saying to reconsider travel because COVID and terrorism. Has there been any local news or warnings of terrorism or attacks? The 20th anniversary of 9/11 is coming up, and the evacuation of Afghanistan seems to have people on edge. Should I be worried? Thank you, Stephanie. Okay. Stephanie, Louise answered some of your questions already. And yes, there are people who come to France without getting their health pass first. It seems to me the majority of people get the health pass, but for some reason, some don't. And I don't know why they decide to grant some applications fast, why in the same family, sometimes it takes a little longer for another member of the family. It's all a black box to me. But like I said just now when talking to Louise, in Paris, everyone I've heard from does fine with their CDC cards. And you can get a PCR test. I mean, it's not fun, but it's doable. About the terrorism alert status. No, local French news are not warning us of possible terror attacks. I am in France. It does not feel any more dangerous now than at any other time. So I don't know what the State Department is basing this on at all. Nobody knows when these things happen. Unfortunately, it's like mass shootings in the US. They happen, we know that. But as far as I know, it's impossible to say where and when. Now, the State Department thinks they know, but they've said that like a month ago and nothing has happened. So now it's possible the awful news from Afghanistan will change the course of events. But as far as France is concerned, we've evacuated everyone that the French military was going to evacuate. The operation is over. Now they're watching at home, of course, but they always do that anyway. And sometimes it works and sometimes it fails. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. Travel during a pandemic is not for the faint of heart. But as you mentioned, this is 20 years since 9/11 and terrorism never stopped, I won't let that stop me, but it's one of those personal decisions that nobody can take for you. Now, on to why my recording with Louise didn't sound good. When I interview anyone, I do it with my cell phone. My guest's voice goes from the cell phone to a digital recorder, and it's always worked great. But not all cell phones are created equal when it comes to how much volume they can deliver. I did not know this until I started talking to Louise on my cheapo Show Me Chinese phone. I could hear her fine through my headphones, but I could see that my digital recorder could barely hear anything coming from the phone. I have these, I have indicators on the digital recorder. So I cranked up the volume all the way up on the phone. That didn't change anything. I cranked the gain all the way up on the digital recorder. That didn't do much. I told Louise, I'm not sure I can use this recording, but later in the audio software I used to put the episode together, I added decibels to her side of the conversation, but her voice was still really thin. So I boosted it again in another audio software that I use. And even with all of that, it was not great. So why am I telling you all of this? This is how the sausage is made, by the way, because it's my excuse for going back to the iPhone. The old iPhone 10 is back in service until Apple releases the new iPhone 13. I have to charge it in the middle of the day at least once, but oh well. I'll be ordering the new iPhone as soon as it comes in a month or so. I'm a power user when it comes to my phone. I need it for photos, for videos, for audio, plus all the other things that we all do with our phones. And cheapo phones can only do a few of those things well. It's possible if I spent what I call iPhone money on a top-of-the-line Android phone, it would do just as well, but I'm not spending that kind of cash just to find out. And the reviews are never detailed enough for me to know. I'd have to borrow one from somebody to try it. So back to the iPhone I go, and now I have learned how to use an Android phone, and I've learned that you can do all sorts of cool stuff with an Android phone, just not quite the power user stuff that I need to do. I mentioned that it's been a hard week for me, and mostly that's because we had to say goodbye to our little dog, Gus, this week. He had several strokes. He had stopped eating, drinking. He couldn't stand up or do anything, and he cried a lot. I thought I wanted to let nature take its course, but after 2 days of watching him suffer, I decided that it was kinder to put an end to it. The sad thing is we had another dog who had a stroke, and then she went on to live for another 3 or 4 more years, so I was hoping he'd do that. But that other dog only had just one stroke. Gus wasn't that lucky. Anyway, Gus was only with us for 3.5 years because we adopted him from the shelter when he was older. Now, we don't know how old he was exactly, but he didn't live long for a miniature poodle. He was probably 12 or something like that. And miniature poodles are famous for living till they're 16 or even more. When we adopted him, we knew his heart was bad, and our veterinarian said, he's a pretty sick little dog, and here's what I can do for him, but he's a pretty sick little dog. But he took the meds. The meds worked for a while, and as time passed, he needed more meds, different meds, add a med, whatever. This dog was a walking pharmacy. I actually had a pill box just for him because I couldn't keep track of all the things he was supposed to take now and then stop and then go back on it, whatever. Anyway. But what was striking about this dog is that sometimes he didn't want to walk as long as me and the Labradoodle, so he just ran home. He was always happy to come on a walk, but then after 20 minutes or something, he would just go, I'm done. And he just ran home as fast as he could. And he never lost his way. He never got in trouble. He never, got hit by a car or anything. I mean, I live in a village, so that was always unlikely. But he would just go, oh, done. And then it didn't matter how loud I called him. He was just done and ran home. That's the first dog that's ever done that to me. And, later in life, he started having a lot of back pain. He had like a solid back. We couldn't, it was like fused. Everything was fused together in his back. He had a lot of arthritis. And the problem is that the treatment for his heart was not compatible with the meds he should be taking for arthritis. So we tried what we could. We tried what wasn't going to make his heart fail, but we knew he was in pain a lot of the time. So he stopped coming on the walks altogether. And I would encourage him to follow me around the yard a couple times a day. And that was usually okay. Then 3 weeks ago, he had a stroke. It was a scary event. He screamed. He was in pain. It was terrible. It was traumatic for him, especially, I'm sure. But then he calmed down and he, within a few hours, he could get around reasonably well. I mean, his back legs weren't working, but he could hop around. We took him to the vet, of course. He got more meds to help him recover from the stroke, but the vet warned us that it could happen again. And then there wasn't a lot more she could do. And unfortunately, it happened again. And, a few days after this happened, and I really agonized over this decision, but as I'm sure you have with your own pets. But it was actually a blessing that euthanasia is an option because he was in pain and no chance for recovery. So rest in peace, little Gus. I'm glad we gave you a few good years because, my guess is he hadn't had a very happy life. He was a grump about a lot of things. And we know that dogs get that way because of abuse or neglect. Kind of like people, actually. And there were a lot of little aggravating things for me this week. I've been just in a bad mood all week. Yesterday, we've had this car. When we moved to France, 17 years ago now, my husband decided he wanted to buy a second-hand Twingo. Now, if you don't know what a Renault Twingo is, it's a teeny little car. It's one of the smallest cars you can get in France. And he just likes to be different. And so that's what he was driving. And he drove that thing for a while. And then he upgraded eventually. And our daughter got the Twingo. And then we even upgraded her to a better car. So we had the Twingo that we wanted to sell. And so we put it up on Le Bon Coin, which is how you sell things in France. And in my announcement, I said, I'm setting the price really low because I was selling it a third lower than the Blue Book value was. And we knew it. I mean, it ran. It was an old car, but it ran. You could go places with it. We did. We had, it had just passed inspection again. So it's good for another 2 years as far as inspection is concerned. Anyway, so I had said in my announcement, this is low price. I don't want to dicker. And of course, the two guys that come and get it, within seconds of the ad appearing on the website, I had ding, 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 ding. I get all these notifications of people that are interested. And the first person who responded actually came pretty quickly. He was here within, an hour and a half. He was here wanting to try the car. And he was coming from Montauban, a small town that we've done an episode about Montauban. Anyway, that guy wanted to talk me down. And I wasn't going to be talked down. So we argued for a long time. And I walked off a few times and I've just had it with this whole thing. Like this whole stop talking to me. And I was pretty nasty to him. Anyway, he did pay the full price. And later called me back and pretend he was another buyer. and asked me how much I had sold the car for. And when I started telling the other potential buyer that it was sold anyway, he said, "How much did you sell it for?" And I said, "Full price. What do you think, fool? I wasn't going to discount it." And he started laughing. He said, "I'm the one who bought it. I know." And I was like, oh, you were just playing with me. Oh. So if you try to buy and sell things in France on Le Bon Coin, just know that it's expected that people will try and talk you down. Although today I also sold another thing. My husband got a better bicycle, and I sold one of his old bicycles. It also sold very quickly because we priced it right. And so, but that guy came and he didn't try to talk us down at all. So you never know what's going to happen. Anyway, the week is almost over, so I look forward to an easier week next week. Oh, and another thing I wanted to say, I'm sorry, I should have said it earlier. Okay, I'm going to share another link for how to get your QR code for the Health Pass. And on one of the pages, it's actually really unclear what they're asking for. It says... Okay, this is where it asks you for your address. It says address, and in parentheses, in country of residence abroad, close parentheses. And I'm like, okay, in country of residence, that would be the US for most of you. But why abroad? I don't understand. Do you want the French address or the American address? And they don't make that clear anywhere. And so since they give you 5 lines, I would give both addresses. Do like US address, and you give your full US address, hotel address in France, and your whole address for your hotel in France or Airbnb or whatever it is. Because I think the point of that is to be able to contact you if they need to do contact tracing. And so, yeah, that form is just not clear. And I'm sure a lot of people are scratching their heads over that. I've got to say, and I have to, last week's episode was about buying a new condo or townhouse in France. It got shared a lot on Facebook. Within a few hours, there were 400 shares already. And I have a sneaking suspicion that my guest, Maria, had a lot to do with it. So thank you, Maria. This is definitely not a topic where there's a ton of information out there, especially not unbiased information, which is what she provided all of us. So thank you, Maria. And yeah, if you come on the podcast, I would love it for you to do the same and share it a ton of times with everybody. That would be awesome. Next week on the podcast, a wonderful episode with Scott Toporek, who's been on the podcast before, but this time we're discussing how he was so happy to be back in Paris at last. So we had a fun conversation, and I look forward to sharing that with you next Sunday. Send questions or feedback to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you join me next time so we can look around France together. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2021 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.